Some people are born chasing the horizon, not because they hate where they came from, but because the place they came from taught them how far a person could go. Zeke Dayton was born on a little family farm just outside our small town, back when gravel roads were common, screen doors slapped shut in the summer, and every kid knew that chores came before dreams. His father, Walter Dayton, was a quiet, strong-handed farmer who believed a man's word ought to weigh more than a signed contract. His mother, Ruth, was the kind of woman who could stretch a pot of beans for 3 days and still make every meal feel like a blessing. Zeke grew up with dirt under his fingernails, hay dust in his hair, and the sound of his mother calling him in from the field at dusk. He wasn't the biggest boy in town. He wasn't the loudest either. But even as a kid, folks noticed something about him. When something broke, Zeke didn't just fix it, he studied it. An old tractor engine, a windmill pump, a radio with a weak signal. Zeke wanted to know why things worked, and more importantly, why they stopped working. There was an old school teacher in town named Miss Clara Whitcomb who first noticed the boy's mind. One afternoon, she caught Zeke sitting behind the schoolhouse, drawing pictures of airplanes in the dirt with a stick. She looked down and said, "Zeke Dayton, you got your head in the clouds again?" Zeke looked up and smiled. "No, ma'am," he said. "Higher than that?" Nobody knew it then, but that farm boy was already looking toward the stars. When World War II came, Zeke was barely old enough to shave. Like so many young men from towns just like ours, he put on a uniform and left behind everything familiar. He served overseas as a young mechanic and flight engineer, working on aircraft that had to fly in conditions no machine should have survived. The war changed Zeke. It changed all of them. His best friend from town, Eddie Mercer, never made it home. Eddie had been the funny one, the boy who could make people laugh even when there was nothing to laugh about. Zeke carried Eddie's memory with him for the rest of his life. Years later, when people asked him why he never gave up, Zeke would sometimes say, "Some men didn't get to come home and finish their dreams, so I figured I had no right to quit on mine." When the war ended, Zeke returned to town thinner, older, and quieter. The farm was still there. The field still needed tending. His mother still hugged him like he was that barefoot boy running in from the barn. But something inside Zeke had changed. He loved home, but he knew he wasn't meant to stay. So he joined the National Guard and took an engineering job at Lockheed. That was where Zeke Dayton truly began building the life that would carry him skyward. At Lockheed, he became known as a man who showed up early, stayed late, and never blamed a tool for a bad result. His supervisor, Frank Barlow, once said, "Dayton works like a farmer and thinks like a scientist. That's a dangerous combination." Zeke worked on aircraft systems through the 1950s, learning everything he could about speed, pressure, engines, navigation, and the fragile bravery of machines that dared to leave the ground. But even with a good job and a solid reputation, Zeke wanted more. Then came the early 1960s. America was looking up. Rockets were launching. Men were training for space. The whole country seemed to hold its breath every time a countdown began. And Zeke Dayton, the farm boy from our little town, saw the door of history crack open. He applied to NASA. Some people thought he was crazy. He was older than some of the hotshot pilots. He had taken a long road. He wasn't polished in the way reporters like their heroes to be. But Zeke had something NASA needed: discipline, mechanical instinct, war-tested nerves, and a work ethic that had been forged long before anyone handed him a flight suit. In 1963, Zeke Dayton joined NASA. For the first time in his life, the dream felt close enough to touch. He trained hard. He studied constantly. He ran until his legs trembled. He sat in simulators for hours, memorizing procedures, failures, backups, and backups to the backups. He had a wife by then, Ann Dayton, a patient and steady woman who understood that loving Zeke meant sharing him with the sky. Ann was the person who saw what the public didn't. The exhaustion, the pressure, the nights he sat at the kitchen table with manuals open, rubbing his temples, afraid that one mistake could cost a crew their lives. But she also saw the light in him. One night after a long training day, Zeke told her, "I don't know if they'll ever choose me." Anne looked at him and said, "That's not your job to decide. Your job is to be ready when they do." And Zeke was ready. At least he thought he was. A few years after joining NASA, during a routine medical review, doctors found a health issue serious enough to ground him. Just like that, the dream stopped. No launch, no mission, no seat in the spacecraft. Zeke Dayton, who had survived war, earned his place at NASA, and trained for the impossible, was told he could not fly. For a while, he said very little. He kept working. He helped other astronauts prepare for missions. He solved engineering problems. He sat in control rooms and listened to voices from space that he had once hoped would include his own. To the outside world, he handled it with grace. But Anne knew better. So did his old friend from NASA, Dr. Samuel Ortiz, the flight surgeon who had delivered the news. Ortiz once found Zeke alone after hours, staring at a mission patch pinned to the wall. "You know," Ortiz said gently, "there's honor in helping others get there." Zeke nodded. "I know," he said, "but I didn't come this far just to point at the moon from the ground." That was when Zeke began the second great mission of his life. Not to reach space, not yet. First, he had to win back the right to try. For nearly 10 years, Zeke fought for his health with the same discipline he had once brought to the farm, the war, Lockheed, and NASA. He changed how he ate. He trained carefully. He submitted to every test. He endured setbacks. He watched younger men fly. He attended launches with a smile on his face and an ache in his chest. Every year, he asked the same question, "Am I cleared?" And for years, the answer was no. Back home, people still followed his story. At the diner, old men who had once known him as Walter Dayton's boy would read newspaper clippings about NASA and wonder if Zeke would ever get his chance. Miss Clara Whitcomb, older now, kept one of his NASA photographs pinned near her desk. When students asked who he was, she would say, "That is what happens when a farm boy refuses to believe the sky is the limit." Then, in the 1970s, after years of work, patience, frustration, and faith, Zeke Dayton was finally cleared for flight. He was older now. His hair had silver in it. His face carried lines earned honestly. But when he put on that spacesuit, he looked like a man who had spent his whole life walking toward that moment. On launch morning, Anne stood behind the glass, holding her breath with the rest of America. Back in our town, people gathered around televisions in living rooms, classrooms, the feed store, and the diner. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8. Zeke sat strapped inside the spacecraft, calm as a Sunday field. 7, 6, 5. Some say he carried a small keepsake from home with him, a little piece of wood from the old Dayton barn. 4, 3, 2, 1. Liftoff. And just like that, Zeke Dayton rose from the earth. The boy who had once drawn airplanes in the dirt was now above the clouds, above the weather, above the world that had raised him. During the mission, Zeke looked down at Earth and later said it reminded him of looking across the farm at sunrise, only bigger, quieter, more beautiful than any man had a right to expect. He completed his mission with the same steady focus that had defined his life. No drama, no boasting, just the work. When he returned, reporters wanted to make him a hero. Zeke never cared much for that word. He always said the real heroes were the ones who didn't come home from the war, the families who waited, the engineers nobody saw, and the small towns that raised children to believe work mattered. Zeke continued working at NASA until the early 1980s. He never moved back to the farm. Life had taken him elsewhere, but he never forgot where he came from. He wrote letters to students. He visited when he could. And whenever someone asked what made him successful, he never started with NASA. He started with the farm. He talked about early mornings, cold hands, broken equipment, long days, doing the job right even when nobody was watching. Years after Zeke Dayton retired, our town opened a small space museum in his honor. It wasn't the biggest museum in the world, but it had heart. Inside were photographs, flight patches, old newspaper clippings, models of rockets, and a display about his family farm. Out front stood a statue of Zeke in his spacesuit, helmet tucked under one arm, eyes lifted toward the sky. Tourists still stop there. Kids still take pictures beside it. And every now and then, someone who knows the story will stand quietly in front of that statue and remember what it means. Zeke Dayton's life was never really about leaving this town behind. It was about carrying it with him. From the fields of his childhood, to the factories of Lockheed, to the halls of NASA, to the silence of space, he proved that a dream can be delayed without being destroyed, that being grounded doesn't mean being finished, and that sometimes the values learned on a small family farm can carry a person farther than anyone ever imagined, even all the way to the stars.